So you bought the house with the intention to make wine, or was that just
No, I mean, I wanted to. I mean, when I was born on a farm, although my father was in the Royal Navy. I was born on a farm, and he loved his farm in Wales. And I was born on the farm. Actually, I wasn't. I was born in Berkeley Square, but we went to the farm afterwards. And in the beginning of the war, I was on the farm, and I spent a lot of time with the war, except when I was from Trinidad on the farm. And I used to love the farm. And then I went, when I was 18, I was supposed to be doing my national service in the Navy, but I had bad asthma at school. And the Navy said, no, we don't want people with your problems, you know. Sorry. And a friend of mine said, go send him out to Rhodesia. That'll fix him. So at 17, I was put on a boat to go to Rhodesia. And I worked my passage on a boat for Clan Line Shipping Company. And every 4 hours, I had to do the weather report. And send it down to the radio operator, who tapped it in Morse. You wouldn't believe it, you know. Tapped it in Morse, and that's how they made the weather forecasts. All the ships going around the world tapped their things. They did 4-hour reports sent into the Met Office in London, and the Met Office could see what the weather pattern was and mapped it out. I didn't have computers or anything in those days, I suppose. And did the forecast. That's how the forecast was made. And I was paid 6pence a week for that. We spent 3 weeks going to Mombasa, and my sister, my half sister, was living in Africa. So I went to see her, and then I had a job fixed up for me in southern Rhodesia. And I went down to work on a tobacco farm, which was great fun. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Because it was all manual work, and you had to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning as it got daylight, go out with the boys in the families to work in the fields, you know, and to try and supervise what they were doing. They used to respect you, but they took the mickey out sometimes. You didn't know what to do necessarily, how you weed tobacco plants, and they'd been doing it all their lives. And you were a 17-year-old trying to supervise what they were doing. It wasn't very easy sometimes, but they were very nice, you know. They used to respect you as, you know, you were there. And it was very good. I did that for 2 years, and my father came out and said, oh, this is wonderful. He still owned his farm in Wales. And he said, oh, let's sell the farm in Wales and we'll buy a place here. And thank God I said to him, no. I said, I want to come back to England. I've been here since I was 17, 2 years, I'm 19. I want to come back to England and just see what England's like anymore. I've forgotten it. And I came back to England, and after I went to stay with my sister, half-sister in London, and we shared a flat. And after a few months of rushing around London, I met my future Belgian wife, who was 12 years older than me. And all her family said, you're getting married? He's a nice-looking young man, but he hasn't got any money, and he's a Protestant. You can imagine that, can't you? With an old Belgian aristocratic family. It was very, very funny. So I managed to join IBM after a while, and I said to everybody, I work for IBM. I didn't actually say I was selling typewriters in the City of London. You were selling electric typewriters in those days, which was the first one of the type bar machines, but all driven by electricity, an electric keyboard, very sensitive electric keyboard. They cost as much as a car, and the maintenance to keep them running was more expensive than a car. They cost £256 for a film ribbon typewriter with proportional spacing, and it looked like print. And the chairman used to receive a letter from somebody else. Miss Bronx, find out who typed that letter. What's it typed on? Oh, it's typed on an IBM executive typewriter, sir. Buy me one. I want one. So I was called in. Can you come round and show the chairman's secretary or executive typewriter. And the thing was a massive bulk. It weighed about 20 pounds. And you went in a trolley with a bowler hat into the city of London. And I had a very good territory with all the insurance brokers. And the insurance brokers were very competitive. And I used to drag this thing up to the secretary's office and take it out of its case and plug it in. And she used to put her hands on it. And she'd been accustomed to bashing an Imperial for years and years and years. And when she put her hands on this thing, before the fingers hardly touched the key, boom, all the keys went up. And she used to have hysteria, you know. Oh shit, I can't use that. I said, relax. Take a, I don't think they had Valium in those days, but take a pill, have a drink, and relax. And she had to buy one because the chairman wanted one. And so for the next 4 days, you had to go in probably twice a day to hold her hand while she was learning how to do this thing. It was a quite impossible machine to use because every character had one of 5 different spaces. The I had 2 spaces, the M and W had 5 spaces, and the O had 3 spaces. So if you made a mistake and had to backspace, rub it out, you had to know how many spaces to backspace. It was a complete nightmare. So, you know, one used to have a lot of patience, but it was fun. And then that first year, I think I sold more typewriters than anybody else in England.
Good at your job, yeah.
And I earned more money than all my wife's friends who were first secretaries of the embassy.
Very good.
And I actually could buy a proper car instead of a van, because when I went on my honeymoon, I bought a new van, which in those days, if you had a van which was unpainted, it didn't have purchase tax. And I bought a Ford van, doors without windows in, and it's painted grey. And I went off in my honeymoon in this van with all my brothers and friends in their Mercedes cars. And I went off in my old van, and we went down to Stresa. Our first night was in Stresa, and it rained so much going over coming down the Samplon Pass that the water was coming in holes in the floor. There was a downpour, and my wife had her feet on the dashboard. That was funny. And it rained. We went to Stresa for 3 nights, and it was a very grand hotel before the war. And one of her aunts had a honeymoon there in 1933 or something. And she said, oh, you must go to that hotel. But of course, it had been taken over in the war. And after the war, this was 1956, after the war, it had sort of suffered. And they divided these lovely big rooms into sort of smaller rooms with sort of cheap plywood. So the people next door, you could hear the whole story going on. Not very good for a honeymoon couple. So eventually, after 3 nights, we got fed up there, and we went down to stay in a hotel my father knew in Monaco, which was lovely. And then we went to Saint-Tropez in Port Grimaud, 1956.
Very different story then.
And Michel was then age 5. That's very funny.
So that's why you looked for a house here in the area?
Well, we looked for a house here because my younger son, Alistair, was living in France since 2 years, and he didn't want to come back to England because his wife was a Franco-Italian. She didn't want to come back to England. And they did try coming back to England afterwards, but it didn't work. And he was living in Paris, and he was renting a house. And I'd been talking for years about taking early retirement as soon as IBM would give me a package. And I kept on waiting, and at 57, they said, right, you've got a package now. We'll give you 2 years pay, and we'll give you your retirement as if you were 65. And, just leave. So I said, right, I'll take it. And quite a lot of it, they were trying to get rid of middle managers who were costing a lot of money, and they wanted the technology then, the PC hadn't really begun, but the old machines were getting out of date, and they wanted young blood in the company. They found too many middle managers who'd been there for 35 years, and they weren't being productive. So it was a big thing with IBM. And in those years, that was 92 to 96, they were trying to get rid of as many people as they can, all over the world. And it was wonderful. And I took this thing, and I couldn't leave the company, I couldn't leave working for them, because I was working on a software project, which was quite an impossible. It's been bought by one of our finance directors from the London Stock Exchange. It was a trading system on PCs. The PCs then were not very advanced, not very powerful. And this was a trading system, and traders, they needed instant responses, and 100%, if the thing went wrong in the middle of the trading, if there was panic. And this was a software system to make PCs do what they were really not intended to do. And it was all duplexed and backed up. But the guys in the London Stock Exchange had written this on the backs of envelopes. They were very, very clever people, but they'd not documented anything. And my job, having worked in some laboratories and knew the IBM process for developing products, was to make this thing an IBM valuable product and take it through product test and do all these things. And of course, it was a complete farce. We could never get the quality that IBM demanded. And so nobody else would take this. It was called Radix. And everybody said, oh, Philips is doing Radix. Let him sink or swim. He's retired anyway. And so they called me back as a consultant. And I was working as a consultant with them for 2 years with an American who was running it. And we had great fun. And I used to work there at the times it was convenient. And then when I wanted to go off to France, I said, right, I've arranged it so for 3 weeks, you won't see I'm off to France to look for houses. And I did that for 3 years, 2 or 3 times a year. And I brought the boat down. That was the time I brought the boat down to the south of France. So it's a good story.